What's the most inappropriate thing you've witnessed at a funeral? An estranged uncle driving past my grandmother's funeral playing. Another one bites the dust. A narcissistic family member arrived late, after everyone else was at the graveside for the burial, and probably lurking behind a tomb to pick the perfect time after the priest had just started talking, wearing an enormous hat and sunglasses and low-cut gown, like she was attending the Golden Globes, red carpet or something, and loudly making an absolute scene of how devastated she was, darlings, and just generally making it all about her. We had a snowball fight outside the parlor of my Pop's funeral. Pop would have approved. The non-family mourners seemed horrified. A relative of my husband died. There was a gathering at her house after the funeral, hosted by her husband. It was mostly the family of my husband, but there were a few friends. There was catered food and drink, and people were just generally socializing and telling nice stories about the deceased. About 2 hours in, a man and woman in their mid-20s show up. They are acquaintances of the widower. They walk around the house a bit, grab a drink, and then disappear. I was asked to get some more drinks from the garage, which was off the kitchen. I opened the door and stepped into the garage. There was the young couple, leaning against a car and engaging in some pretty vigorous sexual relations. Another family member who was standing in the kitchen saw what I saw. I backed out of the garage because I was fairly embarrassed. I mean, who does that at a funeral? I guess the other relative told the widower, because the next thing I know, there is shouting from the garage, and the widower is telling these two people, in no uncertain terms, that they needed to leave. Apparently, not only were they having sex in the garage, but they were doing lines of coke off the hood of the car. Only a few people who were at the gathering found out what happened, thank goodness. When my dad's mom passed away, there were a lot of people there. He comes from a family of 10 now, as his sister passed away a while ago. So there were a lot of nieces, nephews, and cousins. It was an open casket. I was around 12-13, but everyone was grabbing things from her/off her from the casket. All the aunts grabbing things for their kids who don't even know her or remember who she is/way too young. The only thing my dad has a keepsake of his mother is a little rose pin that she wore in the home she was in before she passed. It's unfortunate and makes me feel very sad for my dad. My time to shine. Former mortuary industry worker. The worst is hard to call because I've seen a lot. Some honorable mentions. A rando walking on off the street and proceeding to help herself to coffee and oding in our bathroom. Didn't die, did get knock-ons. A couple fooling around in the urn and casket showroom during the viewing. An angry old woman storming out of the bathroom with a fistful of tampons, screaming about how inappropriate we were for keeping them in there. Because there are children here, she threw them at the funeral director's face. They were kept in a cabinet, in a small basket, well hidden from public view. She was definitely rifling around to have found them. We were no longer allowed to keep our sanitary products in the restrooms after this. A grief-stricken mother tipping her son's casket while wailing and trying to climb inside. Less inappropriate than it was terribly sad. Caught a junky relative digging deep into the pockets of the deceased looking for the family and is assumed money. A woman pulling down her child's pants and letting it shit in a potted plant. The funeral homeowner's horrible dog sashaying up to the front and taking a giant liquid shit in front of the casket and horrified guests in the middle of the service. The same dog biting someone at another service. Tons of brawls. Lots of drinking. Biker funerals were insane. The women were meaner than hell and fighting one another constantly. The dudes were awesome though, super respectful, cleaned the place up perfectly, and even hauled their trash away, most of which were bags of beer cans and liquor bottles. I loved biker funerals. I have so many, but I'll stop here. I witnessed the estranged, drunk and druggy daughter of a family friend come screaming into the visitation, looking for her brothers, because she had found out she was never written into the will. It was a hell of a scene. At an open casket wake, a friend of the deceased attempted to give her a drink of single malt whiskey. She ended up being forcibly removed as she wouldn't stop and spilled a lot of the alcohol in the casket. It was as horrible and inappropriate as it was heartbreaking for everyone. My cousin's funeral. He was 27 years old and killed in a single car crash after he hit a slippery patch on the road and smashed into a concrete wall. At his funeral, all of his brothers, sisters and parents sat in the front row at his graveside service. Then, lo and behold, my cousin's ex-girlfriend of over a year shows up and immediately inserts herself into the front row next to his sisters and proceeds to scream, cry, scream, wail, and throw herself on the ground periodically throughout the service. All of the family just gave her awkward stares, with no one wanted to address her inappropriate behavior. I had never seen that type of attention demanding drama queen antics before, or since. Maybe isn't as over the top as most of these comments, but I'm one of the Marines that has to go present the flag to the next of kin when a service member dies. It's usually old Vietnam and Korea vets, but sometimes it's a Desert Storm or recent war vet, and the mother is there receiving the flag instead of a son or daughter. The point is, I've probably been to 45 funerals in the past year. It's striking how often someone's phone goes off during the service. It seems nearly every other or every third service, someone's ringtone starts playing. There's been a few times when someone will get up from their seat and answer the phone too. Only somewhat inappropriate, but certainly the funniest thing. It was a funeral for an uncle I was very distantly related to, and this is happening in Greece in the summer. The church is very full and incredibly hot. You can smell the sweat. There's incense. The air isn't circulating, and the priest is just going on and on. I don't think I can describe how grim the situation was. Not totally unexpectedly, therefore, just as the priest is getting to something particularly emotional, a man, an old colleague standing near the back, faints. He's completely out. Now, this guy was very tall and rather broad. So not only was it a miracle that he didn't take out the two tiny old ladies right in front of him, he was also really difficult to carry outside to get some air. Somebody has the brilliant idea that the pallbearers, those people who carry the casket, should carry him since they've practiced it and are reasonably strong. So everybody squeezes a bit tighter. Nobody wants to leave the church. Things just got interesting to let them through. They pick him up, 3 on one side and 3 on the other. In other words, more or less as they would the casket, and start carrying him towards the door. Suddenly, this guy wakes up, turns his head several times, grasps what's going on, and who's carrying him faster than anybody can respond, and immediately starts yelling, "I'm alive! I'm alive!" At this point, one of the pallbearers laughs so hard that he drops what was thankfully a leg, and the others struggle to put him down in what is now a church absolutely exploding with laughter. The whole situation went on for a good 15 minutes, which this guy walked outside, and the priest tried to resume the service. But there absolutely continued to be giggles throughout. I, being a teenager at the time, also couldn't possibly hold it back every time I thought of this guy yelling, "He's alive." Nobody was even particularly upset because the uncle we were burying was always laughing and joking around. So it somehow felt appropriate that we had a great laugh at his funeral. Not super inappropriate, but my grandfather was always a trickster. He had a great sense of humor. He had this little song he would sing to me, my siblings, and my little cousins, where he would just repeat the words "poo poopy doo" over and over. At his funeral, my aunt was telling stories about him, and in the middle of her telling a story, my 6-year-old cousin screamed "poo poopy doo" in front of 50 people. Needless to say, it lightened the mood a little bit and made everyone a little happier, remembering him in a good way. At my great-grandmother's funeral, her son showed up to the funeral wearing khakis and his bright orange Tennessee Vols shirt. Then, he started yelling at my mom when she asked him who the pallbearers were going to be, mainly throwing a fit about who was in the will. Mind you, we hadn't even left the funeral home yet, and were literally needing to know who they would be at that very moment. Needless to say, we don't talk to that side of the family anymore. My brother-in-law's girlfriend locked herself in a car, cried, and screamed, threatening to kill herself. At my father-in-law's funeral, she was fine 5 minutes later and explained to my in-law she did it because she was not used to not having all the attention. She thought her being pregnant would make people forget that her father died. At my grandma's funeral, there was a woman that had a really bad relationship with my grandma, but one of my aunts invited her to the funeral. She started receiving people as if she was a family member and tried to put herself at the center of everything. Not a funeral, but my grandmother was on her deathbed. She was going in and out of consciousness. My asshole father and his asshole sister start arguing over who will get her wedding ring, not for sentimental value, but because they wanted to sell it. Anyway, to make a long story short, they took the ring off and their mother came out of consciousness. And the first thing she said was, "Where is my ring?" My grandmother's funeral was on her birthday. I purchased happy birthday balloons because it was what she would have wanted. I was immediately reprimanded by my mother when I arrived as she forgot it was her birthday. But everyone that knew the family knew that she would have loved it. Even my grandfather laughed when I walked in with them. At a family friend's funeral, a man I allegedly met when I was 3 came up behind me, pulled my head back, by placing his hand on my neck and told me that I might not remember him now, but I will someday. That creepy old dumb. My ex came back from her grandfather's funeral. I had to work, with family reunion pictures of herself, her siblings, and her parents, posing next to the open casket. When I casually commented that I thought it was a little off, she explained that they did so because Grandma otherwise wouldn't believe he died. My mom and sister were smoking weed at my cousin's funeral. He was only 16 when he died, so there were lots of kids there as well. My mom also wanted to surprise everyone by sending clowns to said funeral, who were going to paint butterflies on their faces, because my cousin died of epidermolysis bullosa, known as butterflies disease. One of my best friends died in September. There were some questionable circumstances surrounding his death, in that we were all pretty sure it was drug-related, heroin. Anyways, the guy that got him into the stuff, who shot him up the night he died, showed up to the funeral. Hi, I could have killed him. My best friend died last year from a random heart failure at 25. The pastor at the funeral went on for about 10 minutes about how we had all killed him because we were sinners and that we should join his church to make amends. He didn't know any of us. It was very uncomfortable. A marriage proposal to the recently widowed. She accepted. Edit. Reddit is thirsty for drama. Sorry, but you will be disappointed. I know this is a thing in some families where if a guy dies, a single male relative of the deceased will end up marrying the widow. Why this is a thing, I don't know, but no, it is. So, the divorced brother proposed to his deceased brother's wife and she said yes. I doubt there was any cheating going on there. The two are still happily married as well. My step-grandmother died a few months before the Borat movie came out, so everyone was in full-blown Borat mode. Someone's phone went off and their ringtone was "Throw the Jew down the well." The priest repeatedly referred to my grandmother by the wrong name. After the fourth or fifth time, my aunt got up and quietly told him the correct name. My grandmother had attended church weekly for decades. There was no reason for the priest to not know his parishioner. Needless to say, we did not pay his fee. My own kids, boys ages 10 and 8, at their great-grandfather's wake, they got a chair and moved it to the casket and started making his mouth into a smiley face, laughing the whole time. When me and their grandfather, my father-in-law, saw it, I immediately pulled them away and told them they shouldn't do that. Grandpa laughed and said, "It's fine. He would have really loved that they did that." We later found out that the great-grandfather had asked the funeral home ahead of time to put a sign in his hand that said "Thanks for coming," but they refused. Not sure if this counts as inappropriate, but when my high school classmate died, we were already in college if I record correctly. His ex, also a high school classmate, came to the funeral. She cried so dramatically because she wasn't able to end things with our dead high school classmate on a good note. That guests thought she was the current significant other or girlfriend at that time. The current significant other or girlfriend was left alone, sitting alone, staring blankly at the casket, while relatives, friends, and high school classmates comfort the ex. Also, it got to the point that the boyfriend, I can't recall if he attended or just got word of what happened, of that girl during that time, got jealous and got angry because it looked like she cared more for the dead than him, posted a rant on social media. My grandmother died when I was about 10 and my older sister was 12. We were at the wake for nearly 6 hours and the makeup they had put on her was very bad. It was sad and disturbing. To lighten the mood, an uncle told my sister and me that we couldn't feel it if someone tried to lick our elbow. We went around licking the elbows of grieving family members for the rest of the wake. Yes, you can feel it if someone licks your elbow. I went to my uncle's funeral with my dad, sister, and friends. My father was already hammered and my idiot friends dressed in t-shirts and shorts. To top it off, my cousin wore the skimpiest top to her own dad's funeral. My father, wasted, was hitting on his own sister-in-law. My cousin ended up inviting us to smoke medical marijuana in her car. It was a disaster. I walk up to the casket to pay my respects at my grandma's funeral. My cousin walks up at the same time, and as we are both crying, she says, "It's just crazy to believe that 2 weeks ago, Grandma and I were smoking a joint in your kitchen together." What? I was 5. My great-grandmother had died from old age, and for some reason it was a closed casket funeral. From what my mom told me, my great-grandmother hadn't been into wearing makeup when she was alive, and she definitely wouldn't wear it as a corpse. One of my relatives, probably about the same age as me, but more used to open casket funerals, wondered why they couldn't see the corpse. I commented in my innocence that she's bones now. That was one way to break the ice at an awkward funeral. Inappropriate but not cruel or mean. My grandma cried with genuine tears and passion about how good of a lover my grandpa was and how much he liked to have sex. I felt sad for her, but also tried my absolute best to not burst out in laughter. My sister's elderly, Phil, found out he had cancer and shot himself in the head. He wasn't one bit religious, but her husband, his son, had joined the Mormon church and decided on his own that the funeral services should be held there. The Mormon minister, who had never met the deceased, proceeded to hold everyone but me and my spouse captive for well over an hour while he described in minute detail why we should all join his church and become Mormons. We got up and walked out on the sales pitch after 20 minutes. My partner's stepmom's funeral. I was standing next to my partner to support him when one of his distant relatives, before even giving condolences or a greeting or anything else, asked, "Are you two married?" "No." "Oh, but you're together." "Yes." "What a shame." The same woman then approached us at the wake and started going on about how nice it was to see young love blossom after a family breakup and how exotic I was. I'm Asian and he's white because my partner had broken up with the mother of his child. She heavily implied that I was just a rebound and that he would be back to his normal self soon. When my partner corrected her and told her that we had been together for 5 years, she visibly became uncomfortable and said, "Oh, how nice." At my grandmother's funeral, she only had 3 blood relations left in the world, myself included. Her second husband's family did not allow any of us to be part of the planning. They wouldn't let us sit in the family pew and wouldn't let us give farewell words during the service. A family friend kicked other people out of a pew, near the front at least. I nearly lost my mind during the eulogy when the pastor stated she enjoyed plonking on the piano, the same piano she never touched and threatened to take an axe to on a near-daily basis due to all the damn dust it collected. At the grave, each of the blood relations laid a rose on the casket, and multiple people attending said, "Who are they and why are they even here?" Almost as an afterthought, we were invited to my grandmother's home after the burial, which caused many puzzled looks from attendees as to why we would be invited. I noped the hell out of that to give the woman the send-off she would have actually wanted, with alcohol and friends. I had a guy that I don't know walk up behind me and my dad during my grandma's funeral. They were lowering the casket at that moment. This jackass put his arms around both of us, and I looked back. Everyone was wearing black, obviously, except for this idiot. He was wearing American flag pajama bottoms and a red shirt with the sleeves cut off. He looks at both of us and says, "Cheer up, guys. My dad and I are not violent." But we had to eye-talk each other down from turning around and dual-punching the bitch on the jaw. I know, not the most inappropriate thing ever, but at that moment, it felt like it. My uncle's funeral. He was a state trooper who died in the line of duty. So his funeral was a big event with hundreds of people, including the governor. My mom's childhood friend, who has Asperger's, showed up with her small, yappy dog and a big DSLR. She walked up to the front to sit with the family, put her dog on the chair, and then walked around taking photos of people who were crying, getting into their faces to frame the perfect shot, lens shutter clacking loudly while her dog was sat on a chair, yapping at everyone walking by. My uncle's widow and children approached the casket and broke into sobs. It was heart-wrenching. My mom's friend ran over and put the lens in their faces, clacking off a rapid succession of photos. Everyone there was looking around at each other like, "What the hell is she doing?" while simultaneously crying. It was so awkward and no one had the courage to tell her to stop. Afterward, we went to a reception room for family only, guarded by police. She tried to get in saying that she was family, but they blocked her until she got the attention of my mom, who told them to let her in. Then the governor arrived to offer his respects. He was quietly comforting my grandmother in a tender moment when my mom's friend butted in and loudly introduced herself as my uncle's sister. Then she started in on an embarrassing story about my uncle running around the neighborhood in his underwear in high school. She was getting so close to the governor and so aggressively animated in her storytelling that his security had to step in and block her. Then the governor apologized, said he needed to go, and quickly left. My father's funeral. After the service and the reception, my mother, brother, and sister headed back to our family home. A bunch of my father's siblings and their families were also staying at the house with us. We got home a few minutes before everyone else. I was sitting at a table in the living room when I could see their cars come down the driveway. They all got out and were hugging and seemingly congratulating each other. The reception After the service was beautifully put together and was actually a fun time, a fitting send-off for my father. So I assumed they were still just having fun from that. Until they came inside, they all came in together very quickly and quietly. They came up to me and my older brother, sitting at the table, and kind of crowded around like a bunch of kids, about to see if they could have a cookie before dinner. My Aunt Barbara smugly stood at the front and asked, "So, when are we going to be doing the reading of the will to see what was left to us all?" My brother and I just looked at each other for a few moments before we turned to them to say, "Are you kidding? Reading of the will? Like a soap opera? There is no reading of the will. Everything that belonged to my father now just belongs to my mother." The look of defeat, but not shame, was disgustingly transparent. They were supposed to stay another few nights. They packed up and left that afternoon. My grandfather's brother's funeral kicked off the great tombstone debacle of 2009. My grandfather's brother, Sergei, was a hoser who never kept a steady job and drank a lot. He was also known for playing the banjo and supporting the Saskatchewan Rough Riders. After Sergei died, my grandfather and another of their brothers, Valerie, somehow ended up designing his tombstone. It has his name, a little picture of him, his date of birth and death, and a giant banjo with the Saskatchewan Rough Riders logo on it. Sergei's wife and kids did not approve of the banjo tombstone. No one else in the family liked it either. Once it came out that my grandfather and Valerie were responsible for this abomination, the non-tombstone approving family members ganged up on them, and it ended with a fistfight in the cemetery parking lot. Since then, the rest of the family has tried to remove the banjo tombstone. As far as I'm concerned, it's still there, and Sergei's wife is still mad at my grandfather and Valerie. Since my grandfather died, she's now taking her beef out on my grandmother, which is now playing out on Facebook. She also refused to attend Valerie's wife's funeral. Not a funeral, but at the hospital when my grandfather was passing away, his brother and my uncle, his son, got into a fistfight over which generation was abused worse by their parents. They had to be escorted out by security. My mom died at the end of last year. I have a large family, 7 siblings, 10 nibblings, that is spread from Alaska to Florida. I got married earlier the same year, and my wife finally got to meet my whole family at my mom's funeral. Only thing is, when she's nervous in social situations, she likes to high-five people she is comfortable with. Only me in this situation. Definitely the most high fives in one day for me. It just happened to be at my mom's funeral. The mother of the deceased putting on terribly acted and meth fuel show about how much she loved and missed her daughter. Shortly thereafter, she was convicted of the daughter's murder. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe.